Hello and welcome everybody to this Azure Synapse Espresso. I'm joined here today by Filip Popovic, which means serverless SQL pools. We're going to talk today about an issue, or not really an issue, also not really a performance issue. We're going to talk about a general usability feature when using serverless SQL pools. Let's say you've got a user and you want that user to be able to access your view, but you don't want to give him access to the underlying storage. Today, we're going to show you how to do that. So, Filip, can you briefly explain what steps we need to do and what things we can do to actually give a user access to a certain object, but not to the storage underneath?
Of course, there is a way to tell serverless SQL pool how to authenticate when reading from the storage. And by default, if you log in with Azure Active Directory account, AD login, it will use AD pass-through mechanism, which means that it will use your own credentials to access the storage. But you can create a data source and you can assign a credential to that data source. If you define credential as a managed identity or a service principal, that means that serverless SQL pool, whenever you reference that data source, will actually use that credential to access the storage. So that means that you can read the storage, assuming that you provided the access to the storage to managed identity or service principal that was used.
Okay, great. So let's show how you set that up. So for the purpose of this demo, I created a database called Data Source Demo. I've just created it with the correlate. Remember the correlate video that we did before? This is why we're always going to correlate it to the right correlation. I use the data source and then demo database, and I'm going to create a view. This is the typical view. If you just right click, select top 100 from a certain point, you just do select top 100, and then it says from that table, which is a delta from that folder, which is a delta folder for me. Now I've created a view out of this without the data source. Now I'm going to create a user. This user is a SQL authentication user, which is I have no access to storage because he does not have access to storage. He does not have any access. He cannot really go to that storage, which means he is not allowed. So this is basically the goal that we're going to do today. We're going to try and give that user access to a view, which then can access that storage. So all I need to create is I create a database code credential, which is for my managed identity. My managed identity does have access to the storage account that we're going to query in that folder, which means we can use this credential to actually authenticate using a view. Now, how do you do that? You create that database code credential, then you're going to create an external data source. You specify your location, which is that silver delta folder that I have over here, and I will use that credential called Synapse in the day Western Europe. Okay, so once I've done this, I can create a view with that data source. As you can see here, I'm going to say create view, select top 100 from bulk. And you can see taxi because I'm referencing the one folder I need to reference starting from that data source. So that data source gives me the URL, and anything that goes after that URL, I just add in there as the folder. So my folder here is a taxi folder. I'm saying use that data source taxi dataset, which I did before, and then the format is delta. Now, I've created this one with that data source. What I still need to do is to that specific account that I just created, that specific user, is I need to grant it select on that object. Otherwise, it cannot access that view. And also grant references on that database code credential to that I have no access to storage, because otherwise it will try to authenticate and it will not work because it's not allowed to actually use that credential. This will allow it to use that credential. Now, just to show you, let's say we create another view over here, and I'm going to say, okay, data source taxi dataset, but I'm not going to grant him a select on that object, which basically means he cannot actually execute that query. Now, what does this end up with? So if I go over here you can see I have logged in with I have no access to storage. And what I did was the first one is that select without data source. So that basically that plain select without a data source in there. You can see here that it tells me I cannot find the credentials, so I cannot use this. I get binding errors. Basically, like it should work. You don't have access to storage, you cannot pass through that authentication, so you cannot use and query the data in that storage. The second one, which does have that data source, even if we grant references on that specific data, on that specific credential and that data source, if you do not have access to the object, you're not allowed to select on that specific object, which is normal, which has been there like in SQL Server for ages, but just to show you that's there. And the third query, the one with the data source where we've granted select on that object, and we've also granted references to that credential, you can see that this statement completely works over here, and you can see that we get the results from that final query.
Awesome. So Stan showed us how we can create a storage account that we don't have access to. So you can create a data source and create a credential that will use a managed identity or service principal, and then you will grant access to the storage account on the folder level or container level to particular managed identity or service principal.
Okay, great. And also, thank you very much for watching this video. And if this is the first time you're visiting our channel and you like the content, then hit that subscribe button to get more of that sweet Azure Synapse Analytics content. If you like the video, give us a big thumbs up. And if you want to ask a few questions about the things we've shown you, or if you want to see other videos, just type them in the comments and we'll definitely get back to you. As always, from the Azure Synapse Espresso team, this is Stan.
Filip.
Thank you very much and see you next time. Bye.